Hello everybody, welcome to Midwest Imagery. In this episode I'd like to show you how we can use motion to make our images more compelling. There are a couple of different ways that we can introduce motion into our images. Three different ways that come to mind. Simply move your camera around. You can do a technique that's called panning, or you can do a technique that's called zooming. And panning is a technique where we use a little bit slower shutter speeds, anywhere from 1/100th of a second to 1/10th of a second. And we use apertures that are smaller too, maybe f8, f11, f16, so that forces our shutter to stay open a little bit longer. Then we're just tracking our subject at the same speed that they're moving, whether it's a person or a car or whatever you're pointing your camera at, and then burn a few frames off and see what happens for you. Most important though, when you're doing your panning and you're tracking your subject and you make the exposures, just keep following through. Don't just stop, just keep following it at the same speed. The next technique that should be in your bag of tricks also is called zooming. And we'll use zooming with a zoom lens, of course, and our shutter speeds will be a little bit slower too, sometimes maybe a 50th of a second or slower. And what we do with that is, as we're getting ready to release the shutter, we start zooming. We zoom and then release the shutter. So obviously the longer your shutter's open, the more the effect will be, but you'll also lose some areas of focus in there with the slower shutters. And both of these techniques will take some practice too, and with both of these techniques, panning and zooming, you're not going to get perfect areas of focus on the entire shot, which is kind of the attraction of these two techniques. When you take your camera and just move it with a slow shutter speed and move it around during the whole exposure, there's no telling what will turn out once the exposure's finished. Sometimes you get instant deletable shots, and other times you get shots that work. And I'll show you a few examples here in just a few minutes, so let me get that set up and I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. As I said, you can introduce or imply motion in your images by using slower shutter speeds or moving your camera. In this shot, the red-tailed hawk taking off from the birdhouse it was sitting on, I'm using a 60th of a second, an f2.8. My ISO is at 200. The aperture I'm using is because I want to make all this distracting elements in the background soft. Our focus here is this hawk, and look at a 60th of a second does to the extremities of this bird. The wings are nicely moving, the tail's nicely moving, the talons are in good focus, the back of the bird and the head is in really good focus, because I'm tracking this as I'm going along. I'm following this bird at the speed that it's going, and I'm focusing on the head of the bird here. There is room from the bird to the edge of the frame to fly into. In this picture we see a spillway, and there's a little bit of a spray coming off the side, and you notice that this is a 10-second exposure, not 10 minutes, 10 seconds at f13 at ISO 100. I'm using a neutral density filter on my camera's lens so that I can get this longer exposure in this fairly bright daylight. And what happens then is it smooths out the water and makes it where we see shadows on top of it. And here's a shadow of cast from this spillway side here. Here's some shadows of trees that are cast on the water top too. Big shadow being cast by the walls over here. Plus it smooths out all of the foam and bubbles so that we get a lot of motion in this little shot. This picture has me looking out the windshield of a car. I was doing a class showing how to turn night into day, and getting a ride back from one of the participants, and they asked me how would I make a picture like this, and I just exposed for the area that the headlights were lighting up and set my aperture to 2.8, and that gave me 1/4 of a second. Handheld this and let it go, and this gives us a kind of a dreamy look to this image. Here's another example of motion shots. These pictures are pretty straightforward to make. I'm on a tripod here. I have f11 so that I can get a longer shutter speed because it was pretty bright out with the moon, even though the moon was behind clouds. So I'm using 30 seconds, f11, and ISO 200. Then I just open up the shutter on a bridge and let the cars go zooming by. For this shot, I was making midway ride pictures. I'm using f22 because I want to choke down the light coming into my lens to get as long as shutter as I could. And in this case, it gives me 4 seconds at ISO 200. And I was a little disappointed when I showed up here because half of the lights were burned out on this ride. But as you can see, all of the ghosting part of the rides really kind of gives a counterbalance to all the lights that are actually working still. With this 4-second exposure, we can see that it's spinning around, heading this way, and the zipper is, the sign for the ride is solid. There's no motion there or with these arrows, but all of this other spirograph light painting really makes the shot look completely different. Here's another example. Midway's a fun place to practice doing this kind of photography. These two women were standing still enough where it looks like they're solid, but when we look closely they're still a little bit blurry because nobody can stand perfectly still for 4 seconds. But all of these fabulous prizes are sharp focused in this scene. I have another Ferris wheel picture. All of the buildings are solid, focused, no motion. Then we have, of course, the big motion of the Ferris wheel. All the people that are passing in front of my camera. There's another ride over here, another zipper that we can see. All of our lights are blown out because of this long exposure, and yet this moon looks pretty dang good for a 4-second exposure. I wonder how that happened. That's right, that's because I put that moon in here. Here's a shot of every day, something that occurs every day. And what I'm doing here is I'm using my 70 to 200 millimeter lens, and with this lens you mount the lens on the tripod, so there's a little collar that you can tighten or loosen, and I loosen the collar up that allows me to spin my camera body around and around and around. So with this 37-second exposure, I spun my camera a couple of times completely, and then I also zoomed the lens in and out, all the while it was locked on a tripod, and it gave me this shot right here. Can you guess what the subject might be? Just go ahead and let me know what you think it is in the comments. This is the same subject, and what I did here is a very similar thing. I spun my camera and then I zoomed it, but then for the rest of the exposure I took it off my tripod and I was moving my camera in a kind of a tight circular motion. I'm not spinning my camera, I'm just moving it around and around and around. Any ideas yet what this might be? Okay, I'll show you. Here's the scene. This scene made both of these pictures. Here's one. One of the kids were having a party and I was documenting it. I was at a show of some of my motion work, and a woman came up to me and told me how much she loved seeing this person lassoing the horse in here, right? And I said, why, thank you. And then spent a while trying to figure out what she might be seeing in here, and I came to the conclusion that this might look like a torso, and these might look like arm and an arm, and this might look like a head, and this might look like a rope that's being thrown over the head of this, what might look like a horse's head. And here's a little bit of an eye right in there. I don't know, that's just what I'm assuming. But somebody saw that in there, and that's the great thing about photography, is it can be many things to many different people. This is the same scene, and what I did here was left my exposure on the tripod for about 15 seconds so that we can see there's a lawn chair right here. And then after 15 seconds elapsed, the other 15 seconds, I'm just moving my camera around to create all of these light trails in here. And this is what the previous two scenes look like. Now for this picture, I'm at a different show, and a different woman comes up to me and tells me how much she loves my picture of that woman cradling her child. Yeah. So then again, I'm figuring perhaps what she means is this looks like a little child swaddled, and here's a arm that's cradling the baby. Maybe this is the head. Again, I don't know. To me it looks like something different. But this shot is my camera's on a tripod here, and I'm just tipping my tripod back up on one leg and then putting it back to the ground, back up on one leg, back to the ground for the 8-second exposure. And here's what the scene looked like. This is the scene that I was photographing to make this picture right here. We're at a rodeo in Cody, Wyoming, and I was reluctant to use flash because I don't like to use flash in such events like this. However, the camera I was using at that time was terrible with high noise ISO. I couldn't turn it up hardly beyond 200, and when so, plus I'm seeing hundreds of other flashes going off in the stadium too, so I took a chance and hit this and made this shot, and I'm glad I did, because the light gave all this definition to the muscles, and it further helped to freeze the motion in this picture. We've got this great cloud of dust coming up under the horse. There's even a slight hint of a shadow here. The flash put catch lights in the horse's eye. It illuminated all the rhinestones on this sassy bridle, and tack that this horse is wearing. And since I'm using a 60th of a second and panning, that is following the action of this, the focus is all the way up the side here and all along this horse, which gives this image a lot of movement at the same time as it stops it, the action pretty cold. With this picture, we were saying goodbye to a loved one here in this box. These figures that are ghosting through the image are children of this person, and these figures are grandchildren of this person. So for me, when I made this picture, it automatically gave definition to the idea of the impermanence of our time here. And these people's time is already running short, while these people still have a little bit more solidity than we do, or something like that. You can also use zooming and panning techniques to create motion. Zooming, with this picture, my camera is on a tripod. I've metered and set my exposure using f/22 because I want as long as a shutter speed as I can get, and ISO 200, and that helps me get 30-second exposure. So for the first 15 seconds, I'm zoomed in really tight, and then for the second 15 seconds, I zoomed out really quick. Now, that gives us all of these light trails going towards the vanishing perspective. Everywhere we see this, it's going just as it should be. Here's this building is right here, this building is right back here, so on and so forth. We see a double image on here, but there's one part, this little light trail right here doesn't adhere to the vanishing perspective lines. And I think because this was a bridge, that during part of about the time I zoomed, there was a car coming by here and did this. Either that or it was a UFO. You can zoom people. You've got 25th of a second, zooming, focusing on the face, and zooming as I'm shooting. And sometimes it turns out really good, and other times they're right straight to the trash can. This happened to be one that worked really good. When we're zooming stationary objects, it gives a whole new look to it. This was just an area of one of the buildings I teach in. Saw the light coming in. These are all windows right here, windows right here. There's a lot of movement in here, and it's zooming. I'm showing this class how to do zooming too. A 15th of a second. I'm focused in here, and we can see fairly good focus right there, and that's really all we need with this kind of zooming. But everything else just blows out. Almost makes you feel like you're being pulled backwards or sucked into the shot. Gives you a little sense of vertigo. Panning is a technique where you also use slower shutter speeds, typically from a 10th of a second to maybe a 100th of a second, depending on the speed of your subject. With panning, you'll focus on the face or the main area of your subject and keep the focus locked while you're tracking the action. And then press the shutter release, and very importantly, follow through. Even after you've made the picture, just follow through and keep that camera moving, like this one. So I'm using f10, and that helps with focus in these kinds of shots too, because I have a greater depth of field that can help me with my focusing. I'm at 50th of a second, ISO 200. But look, I've got them with both of their feet are off the ground, so that literally looks like they're flying. Their feet are just blurred with motion, hands, hair, everything, and the background is elongated because of that panning motion that I'm using with my camera. They're both in focus. Both of their faces are in focus, and that's great. Nothing else really has to be. And they have room to run into this image. They're not squeezed towards one edge or another. Here's another example of panning. Now, this is a little bit faster of a shutter speed and a little bit wider of an aperture. But it still, look, all this is in focus here. This is a relay race, and the baton is just super elongated. Both feet are off the ground, makes it look like they're flying. The background is greatly elongated, and we can see lots of motion in this panning shot. Here's another example. I'm showing a class how to practice doing panning. Both feet are off the ground, little shadow. She's got room to run into the scene. The sunlight is hitting her just perfect around the face. Her face is nicely focused. This little splash of light on the grass behind here helps to give us some balance in the image. But on the one hand, it's a nice quiet shot with a whole lot of movement in it. You can also pan, well, pretty much anything you want to. This is the picture of a river going into the lake, and all of this silt you can see is being discharged out into the water. It was a late winter, late afternoon, and there were a few breakers coming in to give us some surf, and I just waited for a couple of those surfs to come in so that I could get that foam on the edge of this water. So now when you're doing these kinds of shots, this isn't the first time picture. I probably made at least 20 frames before I found one that would work for me. That's briefly some examples of putting motion into your pictures, and you can start doing this at home. And if you have any questions whatsoever, just shoot them out here to me in the comments. Give me a couple minutes to take this down and I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. Those were a few examples of how motion can make your pictures maybe a bit more compelling than they are. We've done some panning and some zooming, and again, panning is using a slower shutter speed and maybe a smaller aperture and tracking your subject at the same speed they're traveling, and shoot and follow through, and shoot and follow through. You can try it with one shot, or you can try constant shoot, 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 and see what happens too. Whichever method that you start working on, you can be assured that it's going to take some practice to do this. But once you get a few images and see how it works, then it opens up a whole new world for your photography. The same goes with zooming. Zooming can be very compelling also. Zooming is using a slower shutter speed again, and start zooming and make the pictures. Start zooming and make the picture and see what happens. Examples of panning and zooming are legion. Some album covers use zooming and panning techniques. Sports will often have panning techniques and zooming techniques in them. Action, racing, things of those sorts of subjects where there's a lot of motion in them. You can really experiment with this. You can get out and practice in front of your house on cars that are driving by your street. Try panning them and see what happens. You can try zooming on stationary objects. Set up a few items on a table and practice zooming them. Or if you have children or dogs or cats or whatever, you've got subjects galore. So the idea is that there are subjects everywhere you point your camera, and we just want to start looking at them as to how can we make exceptional pictures of anything that we want to point our camera at. And these methods go a long ways towards helping us do that. And that's going to do it for today. I want to thank you for watching. If you have any questions, let me know, and I'll see you next time.